So I would like to welcome Elizabeth Hudson, who is so fascinating. Um, she's enlightened, she's conscious, unlike myself, but I've learned so much from her and fascinating background. Uh, she's in Southern California as well. Tell us a little bit about your career trajectory, and then we'll jump into kind of this talk about sexual alchemy.
Sure. Thank you, Jordan. First of all, I'm so happy to be here. And you're humble, but I think you're
Thank
overly humble. But yes, you're more enlightened than you claim. Um, yes. So my journey in spirituality is I have always been a seeker. I studied a lot of philosophy and analytical writing in college, and was brought out by Paramount Pictures to screen test when I was 18 years old, and had a contract with Paramount, and was being pulled to join Hollywood at that age. And I said, nope, I'm going back to college to study Shakespeare and philosophy. And so back to Vermont I went. um, but then did get pulled back into Hollywood and did a few films and some TV. But once my first child was born, I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. I had had enough of exploring my emotional oceans and wanted to go a little deeper into spiritual practice. And so that's when I got certified in Kundalini yoga and meditation teaching. And then have been doing that for almost 20 years now. So I started my podcast in 2019, which was really an unexpected, so I should say it's called Sexual Alchemy, which is about the convergence of spirituality and sexuality. And it was definitely not something I would have imagined I'd be doing in the middle of a divorce, but somehow felt compelled to speak to healing from trauma and shame and all the ways that we get convoluted and confused around our sexual energy, and understanding that really sexual energy, creative energy, is from source, which is from the creator. And there is an inherent link, and that's something that we've never been taught, and it's often not explored in religion or spirituality. And I felt it needed to be spoken to.
Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, sexual alchemy, we talked about this a bit earlier, is it has a connotation, and yet um, sexual alchemy is really kind of, I have this quote, I have to look, my memory's so poor. Um, Sexual union is a doorway rather than a destination.
Mm-hmm.
So taking sexual energy and turning it into spiritual energy is what this is really all about. But there's a couple other terms that are interesting, or disciplines that people sometimes conflate and confuse. There's magical sex, which is, I guess, what people uh, endeavor to explore or achieve. Most people, it doesn't take much preparation. You may have life experience and skill. You may you may have the skill, what have you, but in terms of preparation and discipline, there is sex magic, which is a part of sexual alchemy, but those two are distinct in their own right. And so I thought maybe you could explain a little bit about um, you know what sex magic is. As I understand briefly, it's sexual energy that is ultimately used to influence other people or other entities, whereas sex magic is intended to transform yourself. So it's more self-directed. And maybe you're looking at me like, I can't tell if you're looking at me like, where'd you get that from? Uh, don't believe everything you read on the internet, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure. No, I think I would say can be. First of all, I think it's important to note that spirituality and sexuality are very much the same thing, and I think that that's part of the distortion of our third dimension, is that we don't understand
Okay.
that our inherent being comes from our sexual energy, right? The life force, the polarity the masculine and feminine energies coming together to create life, right? That are sexual, the genitalia, often referred to as the sacral chakra, which is where the word sacred comes from. So they are one and the same. Our sexuality is God force. The orgasmic state is oneness with Creator. It is the release from our limited egoic self, right? It's the vastness and the connectedness of consciousness, right? So when we look, what part of the distortion that we are under is that we don't understand that, and that we see sexuality as dirty, naughty, shameful, right? And so a lot of when we talk about the fall in Judeo-Christian terms, right? The fall of man, when the apple was eaten and suddenly the prototype of man and woman, Adam and Eve, remembered they were naked, right? Or suddenly felt ashamed of their nakedness. That's the fall into shame, which is the disconnection from source, which is the disconnection from the divine. And the truth of our sexuality is that we are divine beings. And when we come together in union, especially in higher consciousness, there is the alchemy, which is possible, which is that transmutation, which is that connection to higher consciousness and shifting out of this very base level of existence, right, into something vaster, into something more meaningful and more connected. And what I want to speak to on the podcast is that energy that we have barely begun to tap into, but ancient cultures knew of. Ancient cultures knew of the practices that would invoke those higher energies. There's also, if you think of sex energy as a portal, right? It can be used in different ways, right? The portal can be used to elevate, or the portal can be used to decline, to go down into darkness. So it's really about intention, right? And so, when you talk about red tantra, which I think is what you're referring to with sex magic, anything you're using to manipulate is you're creating karma. And that's often considered dark magic, which is not at all what I'm talking about or dealing with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's a whole lexicon, and it wouldn't be surprising for me to confuse things. Thank you. So the other thing I wanted to mention, and you just touched on it, is that the religious establishment doesn't see intimate relations and sexual, I guess endeavor is the word I'm thinking of, but
Sure.
as a means to spiritual awakening. They almost condemn that notion. Whereas there's kind of a renaissance, or there's kind of a revival of the spiritual practices that we think of in a metaphysical context that are kind of becoming more popularized again, or repopularized, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that notion?
I think yes, and thank you for that. I think it's important to recognize that over in the ways that religions have sought to control in some ways, right? That as long as you have to go through us to get to God, we've got an enormous amount of control over your lives. Sexuality is the most powerful force there is on the planet. That is the creative force. And so it would make sense that any institution seeking to control would want to control the overall opinions and feelings around that incredibly powerful force, right? So I guess it's important to recognize that there is an awakening happening, right? We're in the Aquarian age, and there's more and more information available to us. There are more and more people meditating, there are more and more people seeking, and there's more and more free thought available to us, right? Where people can start to go, yeah, that never quite resonated with me. But when I'm finding my own connection to God and remembering my true divine nature, I know things. I remember. right? I remember what it feels like to be in divine union. And I can imagine the possibility of that connection with another human being connected at the heart center, that battery charging effect of sexual energy that's possible in an intentional divine connection.
Now, much of what you talk about on your podcast is divine feminine and divine masculine, these contrasexual kind of gender traits. How
Yeah.
can you discuss how that fits in? Because that confuses me more. I shouldn't say it confuses me more, but I don't think I have a grasp of that to the degree I should, perhaps.
Yes. Well, I think it's about, first of all, I want to be clear that that's also recognizing that there are all sorts of different variations in which people identify and relate to their degree to which they relate to their masculine or feminine, right? So it's honoring all gender specifications or variances within. But typically, the divine feminine is the receptive energy. That is the right brain. That is the creative aspect of our consciousness. The divine feminine is the logical, the more pragmatic, and the logical aspect of our personality. So coming from those places, when they're in balance, they complement each other, right? And if you think of the medical symbol, right? So going into the Kundalini energy, which is not just a yoga practice, but Kundalini energy. Can you picture the medical symbol? It's called the caduceus, right? So it's the staff with the intertwining snakes going up with the wings at the top, right? Have you ever wondered what that was?
Well, because my PhD, which is useless these days, was in veterinary parasitology. I was once told that it was a parasite, not a snake, but
Really?
I'm completely wrong on that.
That's so interesting. Well,
Nematode.
in terms of Kundalini energy, the Ida and the Pingala, the masculine and the feminine, the Sushumna, which is the spinal column, which is that staff, it's the energy rising up through the chakras and awakening the wings at the top, the enlightenment, the connection. So it's about activating that energy that we all have at the base of our spine, but we've never been taught how to activate. So it's the pure potential of divinity within our humanity. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about enlightened sexual experience. That going into that ecstasy, we can go into orgasmic ecstasy without even, having physical touch. There is that possibility within us of activation. And a lot of that is opening up the channels and understanding, you know, quite miraculous energy. And most of us think of sexuality as purely the base act of genital to genital sex, right? Um, if we think of sexuality as an encompassing connection to our divinity and to our creative energy, we can start to open up possibilities. Again, this is the alchemy, right? Transmutation, changing something base into something uh, like gold, right? Turning a base metal into gold. It's changing that very, we are only human, is this fallacy that we're not also divine. We are also divine. And so the alchemy is activating that within us through the sexual energy.
It seems interesting to me that in what I've read, when we talk about the sexual union, it seems like those sexual alchemists need to be compatible in terms of their level of uh, spiritual evolution. Or is that not necessarily the case? I mean, it seems like there would be incompatibility there. Or at least one person just misses out on the opportunity, right?
Right. Ideally, yes, for sure, there's compatibility, I think. But I think what's important is the love, right? That there is a deep love and connection. The heart center is open, and there is a humility in that. There's a giving over, right? Surrender is we've in our Western society we've kind of made surrender a bad word,
Mhm.
but the truth is it's a very feminine word, and which is often why in a patriarchal culture you make it a bad word, right? But surrender is really giving over to something greater than yourself, right? It's giving over your ego or your limitation to something vaster. So, in a sexual surrender, when both partners are surrendering to the heart chakra, which is a Merkaba energy, which is this activating, um, opening energy, expansive energy, there's enormous possibility for, again, transmutation or alchemy. Um, I would definitely recommend if anyone's interested in more about this, looking into the speculations and the channeled works of Yeshua, otherwise known as Jesus, and his partner Mary Magdalene. That there is a lot of speculation about what the nature of their relationship actually was, and that in fact their love and their lovemaking was actually what created his ability to resurrect through activating his Ka body, which is his energetic field, through that kind of battery effect of conscious lovemaking.
Thank you. One other question I had is when you're talking to um, students in yoga or fellow yogis, uh, well, more so, how do the people who are less familiar deal with this? Because there is that connotation. I mean, I saw some things marketed online from various practitioners about workshops, etc. But it seemed to be tailored toward audiences that were already very spiritually inclined and aware. So how do you? Because I know you've had a lot of fascinating people on your podcast. How do you try to reach audiences on this topic? Because like we said, there is that connotation.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's funny because I was approached at a cocktail party on the East Coast, and someone said, I saw your podcast, and I got to be honest, I don't know what the hell uh, spirituality has to do with sexuality. And I thought, oh, oh, that's too bad. But I get it, like compassionately, I get it. Like we've been taught that they're so diametrically opposed, right? That sex is sinful and it's the original sin and that it's naughty and sexual desire is dirty. And um, there's a lot of reimagining that we have to do to heal that because shame is one of the lowest vibrations available to us on the planet. And so, as long as we're associating our creative force with shame, on some level, we're saying to ourselves that we are inherently bad, that there's something wrong with us. And that's not true. It's one of the biggest lies perpetuated on human beings. And once we can start to just get to a base level, just not in shame, right? How about not in shame, not in trauma, not in abuse, right? So many people are healing from shame, trauma, and abuse around sexuality. So the more people who can get to a neutral space, let's start there, then we can start to expand into heart-centered consciousness, expansiveness, exploring what else is possible. And, to your point about sex magic, I think there can be a little more like that can sound a little witchy, like manipulative, like voodoo-y. Yes, I think that kind of thing is possible. But like anything, you have to be careful with your intentions. We are very powerful, right? But to your point about sex magic, I think what you start to open up is we are creators, right? So when we're in communication with the great creator, what else is possible? And that's the big question. What else are we capable of? So much more than what we seem to believe.
Yeah, one last thing is that or I went to a boys' prep school, and I think a prevailing narrative would be that, wow, these young men are not at all in touch with these contrasexual archetypes. And the truth is, though, as I recall, I think that the faculty were actually kind of sensitive, and this is going back, I graduated in 92. They probably were aware that there was an opportunity to educate a young male population about vulnerability and sensitive. I don't remember it overtly, but
Uh-huh.
I think it was the headmaster had written several books about boys' education and specifically single sex. I don't think he would use this language today, of course, but I think that there's something to be said for the opportunity to talk about some of these gender roles and these polarities when there's not the other gender around. I mean,
Right.
that may contradict what you might think, but or maybe not, but or what some may think. But I actually think there's something there. Who knows? Maybe I'll go eventually give a talk to my high school about this at some point. Anyway,
Well, to your point, is your question kind of like where does your sexuality go if you're in a same sex
yeah.
only situation?
Well, yeah. What I'm saying is that if you're in a mixed population, uh, perhaps people are so guarded uh, by peer pressure, succumbing to social norms or expectations that they're afraid to explore something because they're worried how they're going to be perceived. But when you're in an all boys school, and it's a bit militant and challenging, if someone has a moment where they're feeling vulnerable, that's explored away from kind of a mixed population. Not that a young female student body wouldn't be sympathetic to someone's needs or vice versa, but there's an opportunity to kind of isolate someone, not without distractions, but without succumbing to peer pressure or concerns, because growing up as a teenager isn't easy, particularly when we talk about this. I'm no social scientist, so maybe I should retract that, but that's my thought on it.
Yeah. Exactly. And again, there are different ways that we get shamed or we get told what's right and what's wrong around sexuality, right? Which again is about often it's about healthy exploration and being able to be who you are authentically, right? And so that's not about you have to be straight or you have to be, again, it's about authentically being whatever it is that you feel in your soul and your journey to discover that, right? And having healthy space to explore and expand that is indicative of a society that's healthy around sexuality. So a lot of the podcasts that I'm seeking to discuss what is a healthy, healed version of sacred sexuality and how is that possible and what does that look like in a society? What does that look like for all different ways of identifying sexually as well?
Well, thank you very much. I have a zillion questions for you. I'm sure I'll ask you at some point. Maybe it won't be
We'll
podcasted
do
or
a part
broadcasted,
two.
but yeah, no, that's so interesting. I'm curious. Uh, you know, I'm curious about how people receive this because it's interesting. There is that connotation about sexual alchemy because of the name, but um, uh, I think hopefully we can, share this with people who may be curious and will, look into it further. So thank you. Again, your podcast, what's the best way to reach you? Your website, your podcast. Do you want to share some of the links, et cetera, or just,
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And I hope that people will take some of the trigger out of the word sexual and really allow ourselves room to, embrace it in a healthy way. Best place to reach me, elizabeth-hudson.com is my website. You can find Sexual Alchemy on iTunes or Spotify, or reach out to me at Elizabeth Hudson on Instagram.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan.
No problem. I will follow up with you and we'll talk some more. Thank you.
Thank you.